Okay. Oh. Yeah, I corrected it for last time, but I forgot to correct it for this time. Assignment 4. Due date is, well, today, and then 2 work days, like normal, or like this past assignment. October 13th is when it's due. Yes. October 14th. Okay, so this is kind of on its surface pretty similar to the last project we did. Value is, distinguishing the light and dark shades of something, and form is just like the further application of that. So if you've taken or are in my drawing class, this is basically the first assignment that we work into with the sphere and the cube and the cylinder. We're not going to have to go quite that far into it. In fact, the fun thing about this assignment is that it'll be a little more imaginative. So recognize and use a smooth gradient of values to create a convincing 3-dimensional form. Use basic principles of light logic to create a convincing 3-dimensional form. Basic compositional elements and thumbnails again. Vocabulary is the value set from last time with form shadow, reflected light, core shadow, cast shadow. In your sketchbook, draw several thumbnails. This is going to be what we do today. Using graphite or compressed charcoal. We have graphite sticks. If you just want to use your number 2 pencil that you have, or mechanical pencil, that's fine too. This could be a fun time to play with the graphite sticks. The graphite sticks will just be really easy to get to block in dark values if you have huge sections of them. And compressed charcoal sticks. If you haven't really played with charcoal before, it's nice, but it is going to be a little messier, so you'll have to be careful if you plan to use that for your final assignment and you're kind of moving your project around. It's more likely that it'll get messed up a little bit. Create thumbnail compositions using value, shape, form, and volume, guided by the principles of light logic. Invent a series of variations on each composition. Again, symbols and simple objective images are fine, but avoid complex objective images. So we're going to be drawing and using form and kind of blending and shading, but you don't have to draw anything specifically. We're not aiming to perfectly render a bottle or whatever's around you. You can kind of use the design pattern elements that we've kind of been developing and just think about pushing that into the 3 dimensions more. We did it a little bit last time. It'll probably be a little easier, maybe we'll say, this time, just because 1, you don't have to deal with the cut paper, and 2, you're probably already done some drawing with blending and smudging, so it'll probably be a little more intuitive for you. Yeah, so the final one, we'll use the same size, 16 by 18. Same thing, we're going to focus on composition, value, and volume. With the previous one, we really wanted to push the amount of depth we could get in a space, kind of. And now we want to push the amount of volume that we can make objects feel. So it could be completely kind of covered in a design, but pushing all those individual objects to make them feel rounded, to make it feel like it's something, even if it doesn't logically make sense what it is, it feels like it could be real somehow. So value, breaking that down, super simple from last time. And we vaguely went into light logic previously. So now, do it really simple with a sphere. Well, not my best circle, but that's okay. So if the light's coming from this direction, we have, a direct light. What will be really easy is to kind of mark this out, depending on your idea. Mark out an arrow where the light's coming from and then just build off of that. So I know directly here it's going to be the lightest value, and we're going to get a little bit darker. At a certain point, there's going to be what's called a core shadow, which is really the darkest band on something. Probably actually use this a bit easier. We also have these ebony layout pencils, but they're still not quite as quick as this. That's the darkest band. The values from here to here are going to be light, slowly getting darker. But they're not going to be... The darkest area in the light is still going to be lighter than the lightest area in the dark. Just keep that in mind when we're kind of building volume. Also the paper towels. The good thing about the paper towels here, or really anywhere that is like a public institution, I guess, is that they're not good at absorbing liquids, but they're great at blending stuff. So it's kind of a pain in the painting class, but it's great in the drawing classes. Try to avoid blending with your fingers. You'll put oils into the paper, and it can be a huge pain for you in the future if you like put a thumbprint down and then the oil is holding that into the paper, and then you want to, oh, that's a mistake, I'm going to erase that. The oil has a tendency to hold it in the paper, and you can't erase it. Plus, you'll just be a little neater if you're using these paper towels. The paper towels are pretty great for this. So just clean that up with the eraser. So the core shadow right here, this band that's coming across, right before that, it's called the terminator, the boundary, where the light terminates. And then it'll go darker. We'll have a little bit of a cast shadow. So this is called a form shadow, the shadow that's on a form that makes a form feel three-dimensional. And then a cast shadow, which is when the object is in the way of a light, it makes a flat shadow. Usually it's a much sharper on its edges. I'm not going to color this whole thing in, just a little bit. This should be all shadow. And then you'll have a little bit of reflected light. So the light will bounce, it's going here, but it also goes around the form. It also goes around the form, and if this is, say a table, it's bouncing off the table and reflecting into the bottom of the sphere. And it's creating a little bit of a light. Don't get too carried away with this reflected light, which is called the reflected light. It shouldn't be quite as bright as anything in the lights. So even though it is a light, it's a pretty diluted light. It should still be a little bit darker than the darkest area in your lights. So with these principles of the core shadow, the reflected light, and this smooth gradient, you can draw anything you want. Let's say this is kind of a fun exercise to do. This shape, and let's say light's coming from here. So light's going to hit here the most. Under here is going to be shadow. Light's going to hit here too, so it's going to kind of twist here. Shadow, shadow, shadow. And then I can knock in all the darks, blend it. This is kind of my general method of doing this because it's pretty quick this way. Doing the general shadow boundary, and then using the paper towel to kind of blend it up into your lights, just so you have a little bit of that subtle value. That's kind of hard to get if you try to draw it directly with your pencil. Go back in, kind of erase out that light. And then as you render those things, and then putting a reflected light in, it'll make something look really realistic, and you can really push that more and more. Obviously, the better examples. Was that before? Okay, like this. Obviously taking a lot more time to do that, but we have the core shadow in there, the highlight, the cast shadow right there. And as you develop more and more objects in this space, so then maybe I want, a sphere right here, and I'm saying that the light's still coming here, having this here. You can have other objects cast shadows and lights on other things. The reflected light might be a little brighter down here. But using compositional elements, you can just place here, 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 here. Maybe I want another object right behind here. That's kind of interesting. It's really weird. The really fun thing about this is they become so surreal so quickly because it's like shapes floating around. But you can do a more structured kind of idea or pattern. So I know there was kind of like some shapes like this last time. Interior shape. And you could almost do, one value here, and this is casting a shadow underneath it. That's kind of retreating underneath this. And then moving around more and more in terms of activating the space and placing objects in the space. The key to making something look realistic that you just kind of made up is, again, the core shadow, the reflected light. If it casts a cast shadow, not everything always casts a cast shadow depending on the light, and a variety of values in here. The more and more values that you can pick out between your darkest and your lightest area, the more something starts to emerge from the paper more and more. So I'd like to push this, because it is kind of 2 values in here, maybe there's a third value here, 4 values, 5, and maybe 6. You can push things all the way up to like 9, 10, even getting to the point that you can't even differentiate individual values where they start and stop. That's really where you want to be. But for a basic value scale, kind of a 9 is really easy to do. Picking out your lightest and your darkest, and then finding one in between. And then you'll usually have another one in between here, and then just bridging the gap between those, and you'll eventually get a really smooth gradient like this. So is that it? Like form shadow, cast shadow, core shadow, reflected light. And this is obviously the midtone in here, and this is the highlight. On objects, and this could be something maybe someone's interested in. On objects, the highlight is the highest light, the highest value on a form shadow. Oftentimes people think of it as a reflected light off of something, like the glint in your eye. That's called a specular reflection, which is a very specific word for a reflection of light off of a glossy surface or a reflective surface. That's not what we're talking about necessarily in when I say highlight, but you could totally do a series of eyeballs or like eyeball shapes with all specular reflections on it. It doesn't have to be based off of something, so if you're going to do the eyeball, or something like that, don't do something that you're necessarily observing from life. You don't need to push it to be that realistic. We're not doing like in the hallway there's the eyeball drawings, and I think that's a figure drawing class. You don't need to do that. Just filling up the page with compositional elements, and if that's maybe what you're interested in, think a little more, I wouldn't say cartoony, but in a way that's less holding you to observational accuracy. Yeah, I'll get some graphite. We'll probably do this on the smoother paper, but we still have that white textured paper, which could be interesting. If you want to pick up a scrap of that and practice on that, it will be a little different, but that's just kind of if you're interested in that extra step. One of the things that I can see coming out in this one is it is really easy for this one to get messy. Make sure that you keep your borders and everything else clean. We don't want thumbprints and charcoal or graphite all over the final drawing. So yeah, I think that's it. Let me